What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Game Chamber, and holy hell, Cody's doing an edited video on this channel. It's been like years. So for those of you that follow this channel, you have seen that I have been going through absolute Resident Evil fever in anticipation for the new 9th game, Resident Evil Requiem. We have played through Biohazard, we have played through Village, I played through Resident Evil 4 Remake and VR on my own before doing all of that, and we're getting ready to play through some of the classic games, the PS1 versions of the original trilogy. I love this franchise. It is my favorite video game franchise of all time. I have been a massive fan ever since Resident Evil 4, and I could not get enough of any of these games ever since. And there's a topic that I have been very passionate about for a long time now that every single time I bring it up, not only do I get just absolutely blown away at some of the answers and responses that I get and the differences of opinion, but I get all the more passionate about my own view, which is whether or not we need a remake, a modern remake of the original Resident Evil. Now, we have gotten a remake to Resident Evil 2, which was followed very quickly, arguably too quickly because it felt a little rushed, Resident Evil 3, and then finally with Resident Evil 4. And even though I still really enjoy Resident Evil 3, if you want to negate that one as being a bit of a disappointment, Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4 have been pretty much universally acclaimed and loved by both modern and old school Resident Evil fans alike. They are two of easily the best remake video games out there, but I would say they are also a part of the conversation of greatest survival horror video games of all time. And given the success both just critically and financially of all three of those remakes, obviously we're going to continue to get these from Capcom. They're giving us new iterations like Village and then now here soon with Requiem, but inevitably we're going to get some more remakes, and there's always the question of which one should be next. Some people say Resident Evil 5, some people say Resident Evil Code Veronica, some people say Resident Evil 0, others say the original Resident Evil. But the original Resident Evil as an answer is the only one that I ever see this hugely passionate pushback on. Now, after the Resident Evil 4 remake came out, given the ending of that game and some of the chatter and the rumors among fans and some of the, industry insiders, the most prevalent rumor has been Resident Evil 5, that they're going to immediately go from Resident Evil 4 to rebooting the co-op, action-centric Resident Evil 5. And ever since that has been a part of the conversation, I have been extremely outspoken and passionate about my thoughts on what they should do. And I've said it numerous times in my live streams, but to reiterate it again here to kind of start off my point, I think the only sensical thing that they should do to follow up this remake trilogy that they just knocked out of the park pretty much across the board, in my opinion, is to go back and remake the original Resident Evil, follow that up with Code Veronica, and then end another remake trilogy with Resident Evil 5. And the reason why I say that is because there are so many modern gamers who have been introduced to Resident Evil with these modern remakes. And 2, 3, and 4, for the most part, is a very coherent trilogy where it starts off with the Raccoon City outbreak and Leon and Claire and Ada. Then you get Resident Evil 3, which is Jill's little side story inside of that same outbreak that's kind of coinciding narratively with Resident Evil 2. And then you pick up years later in Resident Evil 4, which continues the story of Leon and Ada and his fight against the Las Plagas. I don't think it makes any sense whatsoever to establish that and establish this new generation of Resident Evil fans and then completely bar them from being able to understand and fully appreciate the story and the context of what happens in Resident Evil 5. That is a culmination storyline. That is a climax storyline that is wrapping up the drama and the rivalry and everything between Chris, Jill Valentine, and Wesker. There's going to be a lot of people that would jump into Resident Evil 5 and not have much of an idea of who Chris Redfield is, not really understand the relationship that he has with Jill Valentine because she was completely solo aside from Carlos in Resident Evil 3, and have absolutely no fucking idea who Wesker is aside from him being that guy that was shown very briefly at the end of Resident Evil 4. But if you go back and start by remastering and rebooting the original game, Spencer Mansion, Chris, and Jill in that scenario, building up to Wesker being revealed as the main villain, and then follow that up with a Code Veronica remake, which just bridges that story even more, where you got Claire looking for her brother, and then eventually he shows up and Wesker's alive, holy shit, and then you culminate it, as they did originally, with Resident Evil 5. To me, that would be the perfect direction, and I cannot for the life of me understand any arguments against that direction. The only one that I've heard that I can halfway entertain is people saying, well, I want to see a game remade that is much more in need of a remake, something that is stuck in old school graphics or old school Resident Evil engines and gameplay styles like Code Veronica. I want to see that game remade, or even something like Resident Evil 6 that was pretty much a failure across the board for a lot of Resident Evil fans, seeing them take a new crack at that and seeing if they can actually do it much better. You know, there's only room to improve with that one. I'd rather see them take a crack at that than trying to remake something that technically we did get a remake for back in 2002 on the GameCube and has been remastered and ported all the way up to current console generations. Okay, I hear you. I hear that. Selfishly, as a fan, I can sympathize with, I was there from the beginning, and what would I want most? What would I be most excited for? Something else besides Resident Evil 1. Cool. That's no problem for me whatsoever. But the vast majority of responses that I get are really just people gatekeeping. It's people trying to bar who should be accepted or notarized as a true fan of Resident Evil. If you weren't there in 1996, then fuck you. Or if you don't want to go back and try to experience what a game was like in 1996, then fuck you. Or even if you do have the desire and you give a valiant effort to go back and try to play a game from 1996 and it just doesn't really work for you. It's jarring, the gameplay style is so archaic that you can't get into it, and you're just not having fun. And so why would you sit there and dump 8 to 10 hours into something that you're not enjoying? I really want to experience this story and these characters, but I would like it in a modern engine and a modern control scheme and a modern camera scheme. I just can't get into the old school survival horror. Well, all of you, yet again, fuck you. And not only do I not understand that mentality, I actually despise it. Like, all the way across from movie fandoms to video game fandom, even music fandom, the term gatekeeper exists for a reason. And anybody that actually has some maturity and some common sense, I feel like you just cannot stand the mentality of somebody that acts like a gatekeeper. Just on a very basic level, who the fuck are you to dictate who can and cannot be a Resident Evil fan? And who the fuck are you to say what the requirements are to be considered a Resident Evil fan? So if somebody plays Resident Evil 9 Requiem for their very first Resident Evil game and loves that, and that's the definition of their current Resident Evil fandom, that's not good enough to you because they happen to be born 30 years after you? The fuck you talking about? But most importantly, not only do I feel like you should encourage, but you should totally champion any avenue that somebody takes to becoming a fan of these video games, these stories, these characters, this world. It doesn't have to be a template of how you experienced it and the order in which you experienced it and the amount of time that you've experienced it. If they're here, fuck yes, welcome. Welcome to the party, pal. Join in. Isn't this shit awesome? Like, that's how it should be. Now, don't get me wrong. Would I fully encourage somebody who is a new or a newer Resident Evil fan to at least give a shot at experiencing the old school games, whether it be the original versions or the GameCube remaster or whatever? Yeah, I would. Every single day of the week and twice on Sunday. But I would never look down on somebody or bar them from the fandom or turn my nose up at them if they go and attempt to play something that's 30 years old and they just don't quite get into it because they were raised in a different generation of video game making. They were raised in a different version of controls and graphics and fidelity and the style and the structure of video games. It is a very different and jarring and sometimes really unpleasant experience to go back and play older games. It's just the reality. Even games that I love and have nostalgia for, sometimes even I can't go back and fully enjoy them anymore. You oftentimes hear people make comparisons between like watching an old movie and playing an old video game. Like I had somebody on Twitter that basically said, if you call yourself a fan of the Alien franchise, I can't take you seriously if you don't want to go back and watch the original Ridley Scott Alien. And they try to use that as a base of comparison for why you should expect Resident Evil fans to go back and play the old games and not coddle them with a remake. And I think that's such a ridiculous analogy. Watching a 30-year-old film fundamentally really isn't a different experience at all than watching a film that was released this weekend. Going back and playing a 30-year-old game is entirely different than playing a game that was released this weekend. Control schemes, graphics, the level design, the pacing of the story, the cutscenes, and the animations to kind of present that story, they're night and day different. In fact, to that point, the only way that you can actually make that analogy ring some bit of truth is if we were required to watch older films on whatever form of physical media they were released on originally, and they never upconverted to new ones. Like if you wanted to go back and watch Ridley Scott's original Alien, but you could only watch it on Betamax on a tube television. And even that doesn't completely capture the difference because you still have to interact with the video game. You can just passively watch an old film no matter what quality of screen you're looking at it on, no matter what type of physical media you're watching it on. But a video game, you still have to interact with it. You still have to push yourself through to get to the rest of the story, to get to the rest of the gameplay. You still have to adjust to old controls. You still have to figure out how games were crafted back in the day versus today, modern times, modern console generations. There are so many potential blockades and turnoffs to old school games that have to be fully acknowledged if you're actually going to discuss this topic. And I think the other side of that is that the way that we experience storytelling and especially cutscenes and like the graphics of a video game today do make a bit of difference in how a story lands. We had certain expectations back in the 90s and early 2000s for video games. We understood the limitations. There's not really much limitation to video games anymore. There's video games where the visual experience, the storytelling rivals and sometimes even surpasses what we're capable of doing on the big screen or even in TV series at this point. And so if we just talk about Resident Evil as the one example here, I think there's good potential for a number of people who play video games nowadays that will go back and experience the Jill Sandwich version of Resident Evil and not really get the hype, not really understand the campiness, not really get into the tone of what the video games were back in the day, versus if you have the type of storytelling that we've seen in Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, much more potential for them to go, holy shit, yeah, I get it. The hype is real. This is fucking awesome. Spencer Mansion all day, baby. And you say something like that, and oftentimes you get the response of people's just frustration and disappointment of people not being able to go back and appreciate the way that things were, not being able to adapt to older control schemes, older versions of campiness, cutscenes, storytelling, not being able to appreciate where all this came from. And there's certainly some validity to that frustration that I can sympathize with, and I have myself sometimes. You have the same conversation every time you talk about a movie remake, where some people are totally in champion of it. Maybe it'll be a cool new alternate version, a new reimagining that can coexist alongside the classic that I love, and other people that are much more cynical going, if that comes out, that's going to ruin the original, or it's going to taint or somehow diminish the original, or if people like that one, I automatically hate them because now they like that version rather than the objectively better version that we got. And what I always say to that is, one, people's tastes are people's taste. If they prefer the Resident Evil 3 remake to the original because that's the style of gameplay they like, you can't hate them for that. You can give your perspective, you can bounce back and forth ideas and debate a little bit, but you can't hate them for that. But more importantly, the reason why I always champion movie remakes as well as video game remakes is that there's a lot of potential that somebody could play a newly revitalized version of the original Resident Evil, absolutely love it. Maybe that's their first Resident Evil experience, and that actually motivates them to go back and experience and check out the old games that they otherwise would not have had. I was a living example of that when Resident Evil 4 came out. Somehow I missed the party when the first 3 Resident Evil games and Code Veronica came out. I was so late to the Resident Evil fandom that I kick myself in the ass every single time I talk about it. But Resident Evil 4 was my first Resident Evil experience, and I fucking loved that game. To date, it's still my number 2 video game of all time, only behind the classic original Metal Gear Solid. But after I completed Resident Evil 4, a bunch of times and basically unlocked and uncovered every single corner, opened every drawer, found every single piece that was available in that current state of that GameCube game. What did I follow up by doing? I went out and I bought the Resident Evil remake on GameCube and the ports of Resident Evil 2 and 3 and binged through those and replayed them multiple times, which I otherwise would not have had the motivation to do if I had not loved my initial experience and my indoctrination, if you will, with Resident Evil 4. And I would never want to prevent a potential of that happening to some younger kid or some person that's just getting into video games or somebody like me that just somehow played video games but always missed the party on Resident Evil that might get locked in with a Resident Evil 1 remake. The other most popular pushback that I see is that Resident Evil already has a remake and it's perfectly playable and it is readily available on modern consoles. It would be stupid to remake it again. They've already done this. And that's the argument that I see, that typically I just have to assume that people are being purposely obtuse just to feel like they're winning a Twitter argument. Yes, they remade Resident Evil for the GameCube in 2002. It's been 24 years nearly. You know what other games came out in 2002 that have also already been remade and modernized for modern console gamers? Metroid Prime. You got Mafia, Ratchet and Clank. Supposedly they're working on a Splinter Cell, but maybe Splinter Cell. Let's not act like games from 2002 weren't a long fucking time ago. Yeah, they've cleaned up the graphics. It looks really good on modern consoles. It's still a 2002 version of that game. And even with the option to use more modern controls rather than the classic tank controls with the two sticks, it's still a very different, old school and jarring experience if you're used to modern versions of video games, especially the modern versions of Resident Evil games. So this is just yet another example of something where I would say, hey, I would encourage new Resident Evil fans to go and check out that game, especially with how readily available and inexpensive it is. It's a fucking fantastic version of that original game. But it's still old school. It's still something that is very much a style of gameplay that for a lot of people would be considered dated. So ultimately my question is, what is the harm? What is the net negative for potentially having a Resident Evil remake of the level of quality that we have seen from the other Resident Evil remakes? What is the potential loss there? Whether you're an old school fan or a new fan or somebody who hasn't even become a fan yet, what is the potential negative? If you're a potential new fan, you got one more way to experience a classic, amazing, groundbreaking video game in the original Resident Evil. If you're somebody who's already an established fan and just haven't gotten back to the old games yet, carry over what I just said for you. And if you're an old school fan, you just have one more version of that experience. Like, nobody bitched when the GameCube remake came out and said, we don't fucking need this thing. What is the difference now? And if you're telling me that the original game or the GameCube remake is just an immaculate experience that should be put underneath a glass in a museum and should never alter it, tamper with it, or try to do anything to modernize it, then what was your argument if there was one for the Resident Evil 2, 3, or 4 remake? And if you loved any of those three, again, what is the issue? I swear when it comes to remakes, whether it's movies or video games, some people act like it's fucking Fahrenheit 451 out there. Like a new one comes out and people bust through your door with flamethrowers like, where's the old one, bitch? Rah, it doesn't exist anymore, fuck you. Anyway, I don't know what direction they're gonna take. I don't know what the next game is. There was a lot of chatter about Resident Evil 5. Now there's a lot of chatter and a lot of rumors that Code Veronica is gonna be next, and then they're gonna do 5. There's some solid rumors out there that Resident Evil 0 is gonna get the remake treatment, and I'll just say that, if we're going to remake 0 and not follow that up with a remake of 1, what the fuck are we doing? If there's truth to any of that, like, I hope all 4 of them get a remake. Let's do 0, then 1, then Code Veronica, then 5. As many as you're going to give me, as long as they're of the quality that we have expected from Capcom and have gotten from Capcom at this point, give it to me. All of it. Now. But I just think it would be a real shame for how amazing these remakes have been, in my opinion, at least 2 out of the 3 of them, that we would not potentially have that experience with the original game, Spencer Mansion, Chris, Jill, and Wesker. Like, I just see nothing but awesome things from that. And I don't see any negatives whatsoever that affect any current or old school Resident Evil fan, unless you're just a grumpy old man yelling at Cloud type of gatekeeping fan. So that's my stance. I'm sticking to it, but I want to know what you guys think. First of all, what is the Resident Evil game that you want to be remade most? What is the one that you would be most excited for? And then more importantly, per the topic of this video, do you want a remake to the original Resident Evil with the current engine? And whether it's third person or first person, I didn't even talk about that, but that would even be a cool possibility to go through in the style of Resident Evil Biohazard and go through the Spencer Mansion in that way. Shit, I'll take that. Let me know your thoughts down below on all of this, and if you are vehemently opposed to another remake of Resident Evil 1, give me a sensical reason why. Give me a reason why that is not the ones that I have already given, that I've already established I think are ridiculous reasons as is. So please, give me some perspective, maybe help me understand. Anyway, guys, I don't know how often I'll be doing edited videos like this on this channel. This is always just kind of like a side project hobby for me, but if you're a fan of Resident Evil, subscribe. I've been doing some playthroughs. We're getting ready to play through some of these old school games, so even if you can't play them, you can watch me play through them and get your experience that way. Like, share, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And what did I used to say? Be sure not to miss out because Cody Leach Game Chamber is Captain Shepard's favorite channel on the Citadel.